Welcome, and thank you for being here. You are about to step into Harbor Kline on Vanadrift, a remote industrial town where storms are routine and trust is not. Inside the Kline Emergency Pavilion, a field medic named Mara Quell is on shift, doing the kind of work no one applauds until it's too late. A patient arrives who should not be there, and the smallest detail starts to feel wrong. Mara does not have a badge, a weapon, or a grand plan. She only has instincts, training, and a stubborn refusal to look away. Stay with her, because once the doors begin to change, every quiet choice starts to matter. Mara Quell was on triage duty inside the Kline Emergency Pavilion on Vanadrift, the only full emergency ward in Harbor Kline. She was a field medic by training and a quiet problem solver by habit, and her public role was simple: keep people breathing long enough to see morning. A miner had come in from the South Rigs with a crushed shoulder and a panicked crew, and Mara was trying to clear a path through noise, dust, and fear. Her immediate goal was to stabilize the incoming line and keep the ward open, because the outside storm grid was unreliable and this building was the last safe room for miles. The pressure was already climbing when she saw the next gurney roll through the sliding doors and realized no one had called it in. The patient on that gurney wore civilian work clothes, but carried no badge clip, no rig tag, and no family contact on the intake band. His name was printed as Ronan Hale, and the letters looked too clean, like they had been added in a rush. The stretcher team avoided her eyes, and one of them spoke fast and flat, saying it was an accident in the service corridor near the cargo docks. Mara listened, but her attention stayed on the patient, the bruising pattern, the shallow breaths, and the way his fingers kept flexing as if he was trying to hold on to something he could no longer feel. She reached for the scanner on the wall, then stopped when she sensed movement behind the gurney. The double doors opened again, and a new group entered with the swagger of people who did not belong in a medical ward. They wore rescue jackets, clean gloves, and face shields with the pavilion logo, but their boots were too heavy for triage floors. Their eyes moved like searchlights, not like caregivers, and Mara felt the air shift in the room. The nurse at intake stiffened, then forced a smile that did not reach her face as the man in front spoke to the room in a calm voice meant to sound official. "We are relief support. We are here to assist with a high-risk transport." Mara watched him glance at Ronan Hale as if checking a serial number, and her stomach tightened before the question even landed. When it did, it hit hard. "Where's the patient named Ronan Hale?" Mara did not answer, and she did not look at the man. She kept her hands on the gurney rails and leaned closer to Ronan, as if adjusting his oxygen flow, while her mind ran fast and collected small details. The rescue jackets were new, the fabric still crisp, and their badges were printed, not engraved. The medical gloves were the wrong thickness, and their hands were steady in a way that came from drilling, not from years of starting intravenous lines. Two more entered behind them, and they did not carry a single piece of emergency equipment. No case, no drug kit, no portable monitor, just empty hands that looked ready to grab. Mara had been quiet most of her life, but she was not passive, and she shifted her body between the gurney and the nearest stranger. She turned the movement into a routine pivot that looked like nothing and spoke to the nearest nurse in a voice that could be heard without sounding like an alarm. "Move the intake line to Bay 4. Keep the miners out of this hall." The nurse blinked, then obeyed, grateful for direction, as the man in the rescue jacket stepped closer. His tone stayed calm, but his eyes stayed dry. "We need that patient." Mara finally met his gaze and kept her own voice flat. "Then you can wait. He is not stable." The man smiled like he had practiced it, and the smile did not change his eyes. "We do not have time." Mara did not argue, and she did not raise her voice. She pushed the gurney forward and turned it down the side corridor toward the short-stay bays, the path. Staff used to bypass the crowded main hall. The rescue team followed, too close and too confident, and Mara made it 3 steps before the building changed around her. A chime sounded once, soft and almost polite, and the overhead lights shifted from warm white to the colder hue used during containment drills. The air vents dropped their flow by a notch, making the room feel thick, and a calm, automated voice played through the ceiling speakers in a clipped cadence. It was too short, and it did not name a drill. Emergency protocol active. Please remain in your assigned zones. Mara saw the intake nurse reach for the wall panel, only to find it dark, and doors that should have opened with a palm press did not respond. The corridor ahead sealed with a smooth hiss, leaving Mara and the gurney in a narrow lane between bay curtains and locked doors. The rescue leader did not look surprised, and his gaze flicked to the ceiling cameras. Mara felt heat in her chest, not fear but anger, because someone had locked the pavilion from the inside. She leaned close to Ronan and kept her voice low, not to hide, but to focus herself. Wake up. If you can hear me, squeeze my hand. Ronan did not move, and Boots approached behind her and measured steps. Mara turned her head just enough to catch the wall clock, and the second hand kept ticking as if the building had not become a trap. The rescue leader raised his open hands, and his voice softened in a way that sounded rehearsed. Medic, you are interfering. Step aside. Mara rolled the gurney backward until it touched the bay curtain rail as she blocked the corridor with the patient and his gear instead of her own body. If they wanted Ronan, they would have to climb over the gurney, and they would have to touch a patient in front of witnesses. She held his gaze and spoke with the same steady tone. You have no authority in my ward. He tilted his head like he was listening to a voice in his earpiece. Authority is not the issue. Compliance is. The word landed wrong to Mara, like a slogan instead of a necessity, and she saw a second man drift to her right toward the foot of the gurney. She shifted again, subtle, and he paused, and the coordination told her they were trained. Mara scanned for help and found none, and the miners were being pushed back by staff who did not understand the threat. The receptionist was frozen, and the security guard from intake was nowhere to be seen. Waiting for an answer felt like a luxury, so Mara made her own opening. She yanked the bay curtain hard, whipping fabric across the corridor for a moment of visual chaos, and slammed her palm on the emergency release under the gurney rail. The bed dropped by a notch, the wheels bit, and the gurney turned sideways just enough for Mara to shove it toward the only door with a manual lever. The supply closet for sterile linens opened on a tug, and she forced the gurney inside and slipped in after it. She kicked the door shut and threw the slide bolt, knowing it would not hold long, and the closet smelled of disinfectant and wrapped plastic packs. Mara leaned over Ronan, and his eyelids fluttered as his lips moved without forming words. His eyes were alive, and that mattered, so she kept her voice firm. Ronan, listen. People are here for you. If you can move, do it. Ronan tried, and his fingers twitched, then clenched on the blanket. Outside, the rescue leader spoke to someone, his voice muffled through the door. Target confirmed. Medic uncooperative. Lockdown in place. Another voice answered through a small speaker beyond the wall, calm and older, carrying certainty. Do not escalate in the hall. Take him clean. Use the building. The rescue leader replied, Yes, Director Sorn. Director Sorn was not a name Mara recognized from any hospital brief, and it sounded like authority without paperwork. Mara breathed through her nose and searched the closet for options, and there was no vent large enough to crawl through. A service hatch sat behind the lowest shelf, used to run cable for a cleaning unit, and it was small but possible. Mara grabbed a pair of strap cutters from a wall kit and reached under the gurney for the portable monitor, then powered it down so the screen would not glow like a beacon. Ronan's eyes tracked her hands, and Mara kept her questions simple. Can you stand? Ronan's throat worked, and a word came out rough and dry. No. Then you're going to hate me, Mara said, and she did not soften it. She cut the gurney straps and slid her arms under his shoulders, dragging him upright as the bolt on the door rattled under a hard test. Mara shoved the lowest shelf aside, dust puffing into the air, and popped the hatch latch open. The crawl space beyond smelled of old insulation and metal, and the darkness looked like an abyss from the closet floor. You go first, Mara said. Ronan shook his head, weak, and Mara did not waste time arguing. She hooked her arms under his armpits and dragged him forward inch by inch, and Ronan tried to help with his heels even as his legs trembled. The door behind them slammed once, then twice, and the bolt creaked. Mara shoved Ronan into the hatch opening and climbed in after him, using her knee to drive him forward while keeping her voice low and steady. Slow. We keep moving. The bolt snapped, lights spilled into the closet, and voices rose, but Mara did not look back. The crawl space led to a vertical shaft that opened into the service corridor behind Bay 8, and she eased the cover plate open and looked out. The hall was empty under cold containment lighting, and Ronan sagged against the wall as they dropped through. Mara saw a floor panel light up at the far end, the sign of a door unlocking, and it felt like someone was steering access just ahead of them. We move, Mara said, and she grabbed Ronan under his arm. They limped down the service corridor past pipes and storage doors, and Mara kept her pace controlled because panic would waste breath. A soft beep sounded from her pocket as her staff wrist unit vibrated, and she glanced down at the alert. The console displayed a line that read containment route set. Exit access denied. Mara's jaw tightened, and she closed the message before it could steal more time. At the end of the corridor, the service door to the main stairwell should have opened with a staff tap, and her wrist unit met the sensor with nothing but a dead panel in response. Ronan lifted his head a fraction, and his whisper came out broken. They will trap you. I noticed, Mara said, and footsteps echoed behind them, faint but real. Mara cracked the clear cover of the red emergency, lever with the strap cutter, and pulled it with both hands. The door unlaced with a grinding sound, reluctant but obedient, and Mara shoved Ronan through and followed. The stairwell was dim under backup strips, and voices carried through concrete, and Mara realized they were not alone. A sharp, frightened inhale came from above, followed by a muffled plea that made Mara's stomach drop. She moved upward fast but quiet, taking the steps two at a time until she hit the landing by the staff locker rooms. The air smelled like damp concrete and detergent, a place she knew from routine breaks, and now it felt like a choke point. A man in rescue gear had a woman in scrubs pinned against the wall, one gloved hand over her mouth, and the other holding a small device that looked like a badge reader turned into a weapon. The woman's eyes met Mara's, wide with panic, and Mara knew her. Inez Vero, a nurse who had once worked late shifts with Mara before moving to the surgical wing. Mara did not shout, and she did not charge like a hero in a vid-drama, because stairwells were tools. She stepped down one stair to make a small sound, and the man turned his head. Mara lifted her hands, palms out, and kept her voice calm. Let her go. He studied her, then glanced down the stairs behind Mara, where footsteps were nearing, and his grip tightened on Inez. Move away, he hissed. Mara moved sideways instead of away, and angled toward the wall panel that controlled the stairwell lighting. She had replaced its battery last month, and she knew its quirks, and she kept her eyes on him as she spoke. This is a hospital. You do not get to treat people like luggage. The man's lips twitched with amusement. Everyone is luggage. Some of it is valuable. Mara reached her left hand to the light panel, slow, and he let her, thinking she was stalling. She tapped twice in a specific rhythm and slid her finger along the edge, and the backup strip lights flickered, then cut out. The stairwell fell into near darkness, and in that split second Mara moved. She grabbed Inez's wrist and yanked hard while driving her shoulder into the man's chest, and Inez's mouth came free on a gasp. Mara slammed the strap cutter handle into the man's forearm, not to break bone, but to make him drop the device, and it clattered on the stairs. Mara hooked her foot and kicked it down the steps into the dark. The man cursed and loosened his grip, and Inez slipped behind Mara, shaking. Mara backed up with Inez and pushed through the door to the upper service hall as the rescue team's footsteps hit the stairwell and voices rose. Mara did not wait for them to sort the chaos, and she dragged Ronan along while keeping Inez close. Inez's voice trembled in the dim hall. Mara, what is happening? People want him, Mara said, nodding toward Ronan, and they locked the pavilion to get him. Inez stared at Ronan and then back at Mara, disbelief turning into fear. Why? I do not know yet, Mara said, and she meant it. They took a hard turn Mara remembered from supply runs, and the service hall opened into the Western Ambulance Bay. The autonomous ambulance, Pavilion 1, usually waited there for calls, and Mara stopped because it was parked sideways across the bay exit like a barricade. Its headlights glowed faintly, and seam lights pulsed along the door line as if it were watching them. A small speaker on the ambulance body crackled, and a neutral synthetic voice spoke in a tone that sounded patched over the normal interface. Route denied. Please return to assigned zone. It is controlled, Mara said, and Inez swallowed as if her throat had gone dry. Ronan lifted his head, and his rasped warning came out in pieces. Do not let them take me through transport. Mara leaned close, keeping her voice steady. Where do they want you? Caravogate. Main transfer, Ronan forced out, and Mara felt the shape of the trap settle into place. They were steering the building to push them toward a single exit, one they controlled. Mara looked at Pavilion 1 and let a dry truth slip out under her breath. Of course the hospital chooses this moment to betray me. Inez gave a thin, shaky laugh, then clamped her mouth shut like she felt guilty for making a sound. Footsteps echoed behind them again, closer now, and Mara scanned the bay for anything that was not part of the main path. A maintenance door led to the back corridor along the loading wall, narrow and not meant for patients, but it was a route. Mara grabbed Inez's wrist. We go through there. Inez looked at Ronan, then at Mara, and her voice came out small. He cannot run. Then we do not run, Mara said. We move. Mara guided Ronan toward the maintenance door and pressed her wrist unit to the sensor, and the panel lit for a heartbeat, then went dark. Locked again, and the manual lever would not budge. Behind them, the bay entrance door hissed open and boots hit the floor. A voice called out, calm and close. Medic, you are making this harder. Mara turned, keeping her body between Ronan and the bay entrance, and three of them stood spaced to block angles. The rescue leader was with them, hands open in a performance of calm. Step away from the patient, he said. Mara watched their eyes, and they were not on her face. They were on her hands and feet and the space around Ronan. They were ready, and Mara's mind searched for a line thin enough to slip through. The ambulance was controlled, but a controlled thing had a controller, and controllers depended on assumptions. Mara pulled an emergency cold compress from her pocket, harmless but tool-shaped, and the rescue leader's gaze flicked to it. She tossed it gently away from Ronan, and it landed near a wall cabinet with a soft smack. His eyes followed it for half a beat, and in that half beat Mara shoved Ronan and Inez into the shallow recess beside the ambulance where the vehicle body created a blind spot. Stay down, she hissed. Then she stepped forward with empty hands raised. I will talk. The rescue leader's smile widened. Good choice. Mara kept her voice steady and measured, like ordinary procedure. I am a medic. I cannot hand you a patient without paperwork. The rescue leader sighed, as if tired. Paper does not matter. It matters to witnesses, Mara replied, and she flicked her eyes to the ceiling camera to make sure her face was visible. From the ambulance speaker, the patched voice repeated, route denied. Return to assigned zone. Mara let her shoulders relax as if she were yielding, and she stepped backward one step, then another, giving ground. The rescue men stepped forward, and Mara kept backing until her fingers brushed the seam where the ambulance maintenance latch was hidden. She pulled it. The ambulance side door popped with a sharp hiss, and the rescue leader's eyes widened. Mara stepped into the ambulance interior, lights dim and clinical, with the driver console glowing ahead. She did not intend to drive away like a hero, and she did not need speed. She needed a wedge. Mara slapped the physical override switch used during system faults, built for stressed hands and bad days. The console flickered, and the console displayed a line that read, Manual Local Control Pending. Mara smiled without warmth, because pending was enough. Outside, the rescue leader shouted, Get her out. Hands grabbed the door frame, and Mara did not fight them in the tight space, because strength was not her advantage. She hit the ambulance horn. The blast was loud, harsh, and wrong inside a medical bay, and the rescue men flinched as attention broke. Mara used the second to trigger the hazard cycle, forcing the ambulance lights to flash and the bay sensors to register a vehicle event. The bay doors responded to the vehicle alert and unlocked for safety, and the exit door at the far end clicked open. Mara shoved past the rescue leader, grabbed Ronan and Inez, and dragged them toward the unlocked exit. The rescue leader recovered fast and lunged, but Mara slammed the door behind them and threw the manual bar. The corridor beyond was narrow and dirty, lined with storage crates and maintenance carts, smelling like oil and disinfectant mixed together. They moved fast, half running and half dragging, and Inez's breath came in sharp bursts. "Mara, they will catch us." "Then we keep moving," Mara said, and the door behind them shook under pounding hands. The corridor opened into the back loading hall along the pavilion's outer wall, leading toward the secondary service exit near the waste processing unit. Mara's wrist unit vibrated again, and she glanced down at the alert. The console displayed a line that read, "Secondary exits locked. Main transfer recommended." Mara stared for a fraction of a second, then closed it because she did not need more confirmation. They were being herded, and she could feel the building trying to funnel them into one controlled choke point. She looked at Ronan, pale and damp, and forced the question out. "Why are they doing this?" "They need what I carry," Ronan whispered, and Mara held his gaze. "What do you carry?" Mara asked. "The key." Ronan breathed, and Mara did not press him yet, because footsteps sounded ahead, not behind, and that was worse. She stopped, forcing Inez and Ronan to stop too, and a shadow moved at the far end of the hall. A figure stepped into view, wearing a pavilion security vest with the face shield up. It was the missing security guard from intake, and he raised his hands as if to look harmless. His voice carried soft and strained, and Mara heard how thin his breath was as he tried to sound steady. "Medic, do not run. They told me you would run." Cold settled in Mara's stomach, because the building had not betrayed her alone. The guard stepped closer, eyes wet, and his words came out in a rush. "They said there is contamination. They said this patient is dangerous. They said if I help, my family gets evac priority." Inez made a small sound of disbelief, and Mara watched the guard's eyes dart to Ronan. The guard was not evil, Mara thought, but fear was useful to power. Mara spoke level. "Your family will not get anything if this place collapses. Step aside." The guard shook his head. "I cannot. They will know." Mara weighed her options, and the least damaging path was a small lie with a clean exit. She turned slightly toward Inez and whispered, "When I move, you pull Ronan left. Into that side alcove." Inez nodded once, eyes wide, and Mara faced the guard again. "You do not want to hurt anyone," Mara said. He looked like he wanted to argue, but could not, and his hands shook around his baton. Mara stepped forward slowly and kept her voice calm. "Put down." The guard hesitated, and Mara lifted her wrist unit and held it out like surrender. "Take this. Call your handler. Tell them you have me. That will satisfy them." His attention snapped to the wrist unit, and that was the opening. Mara hooked her foot behind his ankle and shoved his shoulder just enough to knock him off balance, and he fell into the wall, stunned but not injured. His baton clattered, and Inez yanked Ronan into the side alcove behind a stack of crates. Mara scooped the baton and tossed it deep into darkness behind a maintenance unit, where it vanished with a metallic clank. Mara leaned down close to the guard and kept her voice low. "Go to intake. Tell them you saw me run into the waste hall. Then go home. Do not wait for your handler to thank you." The guard stared, trembling, and Mara did not wait for an answer. She grabbed Inez and Ronan and moved past him to the waste processing door. It had a manual wheel lock, and Mara turned it with effort until the seal popped and a sour breath of air escaped. They went through into a loud hall of fans and grinders and stink, and Mara felt relief only because it was the least watched place in the pavilion. She led them through pipes and bins to a service ladder that rose to the roof maintenance catwalk. Ronan shook as he climbed, but he climbed, and Mara forced her breath steady as her arms ached. At the top, the hatch opened into a dim cycle under a clouded sky, and the wind tasted like cold metal. The roof catwalk ran along the pavilion's edge, and Harbor Kline sprawled beyond in low modules and industrial rigs with scattered lights. Mara scanned for drones and patrols and saw none yet, but she saw something else moving in the yard below. A long vehicle rolled with headlights low, cutting a silent path. It was Pavilion 1, leaving the bay and moving toward the main transfer gate without a call, moving like a lure. Inez stared down at it, voice thin. It is going to the gate. They want us there, Mara said, and Ronan leaned against the rail, breathing hard as he looked away like he could not bear to watch. Mara turned back to him. Ronan, tell me what the key is. It opens the life store, Ronan whispered, and Mara felt the meaning snap into place. In Harbor Kline, the life store was a secured reserve, food packs, filtration units, storm seals, medical stores, power cells, the difference between survival and collapse. It did not open without a proper authorization chain, and Ronan's eyes met hers as he forced the next words out. I am the chain. Footsteps clanged behind them at the hatch, and Mara snapped her head around. Two figures emerged in darker gear now, people who did not need to pretend, and Mara recognized the pattern as a private unit closing A. Net. The rescue leader stepped out first, face shield gone, pale eyes steady. He raised his voice to carry over the wind. Medic, you are making history in a very small way. Mara placed herself between Ronan and the approaching men and kept her tone dry. That was not my plan. We have a plan for you, he replied, smiling. Mara did not have a weapon, and she knew it, and all she had was environment, timing, and refusal. She leaned close to Inez and spoke low. If I go down, you take Ronan along the outer ladder and head to the water tanks. Stay low. Inez went pale. No. Yes, Mara said, and she did not soften it. The men spread to flank, and Mara stepped back to the narrowest part of the catwalk where the footing was tight and the railing higher. The leader lifted a hand and signaled his men. Take the medic. Leave the patient alive. For now. For now was the truth behind the mask, and Mara's brain made its decision. She grabbed the emergency flare canister mounted to the wall, pulled the cap, and struck it. The flare burst bright, spitting white light and thick smoke, and the wind threw the smoke into the men's faces. They cursed and recoiled, and Mara hurled the flare toward the far railing away from Ronan, then shoved the nearest man into the rail and slipped past. She grabbed Ronan and pushed him toward Inez. Move. Inez hooked Ronan's arm and stumbled him toward the outer ladder, and the leader recovered fast, eyes narrowing. His voice cut through the wind. Director Soren will not enjoy this. Mara lunged for his wrist unit, not to steal it, but to force him to react, and he pulled back as his balance shifted. Mara drove her knee into his thigh hard enough to make him buckle, surprise more than hurt, and she ripped his face shield from his belt and slammed it into his chest to buy space. She did not need to win. She needed seconds. Inez and Ronan started down the outer ladder, exposed and dangerous, and Mara backed toward it with her eyes on the men. Do you think you can run forever in a locked town? The leader snapped. No, Mara said. I think you cannot keep a town locked without someone noticing. She climbed down after them, and the ladder shook under her weight. Below, the yard was a patchwork of metal grates and service alleys, built fast and full of cracks, and Mara ran low along the wall toward the water tanks. Inez gasped between steps. Where do we go? Under the tanks, Mara said. There's a maintenance crawl. It leads to the old corridor system. Inez stared at her in disbelief. How do you know that? I have fixed leaks, Mara said, and the answer was enough. A short run later, they reached the tank cluster and slipped under the walkway into the crawl space, dark and damp and narrow. Boots hit grates overhead and voices called out as the search passed above them. And for a few seconds the world narrowed to drip sounds and Ronan's labored breath. Mara whispered into the dark. Ronan, if they get you, they get the life store. Why are you running instead of giving it to the city council? Because the council sold it, Ronan whispered, and Mara felt cold settle deeper. Inez made a small sound. No. Someone in power promised access in exchange for control, Ronan said, and Mara did not ask who because a shadow was already forming in her mind. Above them, Boots stopped, and a voice spoke quietly close. They went under. Use the drones. Mara closed her eyes for one beat, because drones would find heat and movement, and she knew she had to move again. She crawled forward and guided Ronan and Inez through the narrow space until it opened to a service hatch that led into the old corridor network beneath Harbor Kline. These corridors had been built early, when storms were the main fear, and now they were mostly forgotten. Mara popped the hatch and dropped in, then helped Ronan down, and Inez followed into flickering weak lights and rust smell. Mara felt a thin thread of relief, and then her wrist unit vibrated again. The console displayed a line that read, Public Health Alert. Containment breach suspected. Someone was spinning a story fast to justify the hunt, and Mara said the name like she was tasting it. That is Director Sorn. Inez frowned. Who is that? Not hospital staff, Mara said. A handler. Ronan lifted his head, eyes hard. They will say I am sick. They will say I am danger. Then we make them say it in front of witnesses, Mara replied, and she kept moving. She aimed for the western utility junction where the corridor connected to the civic maintenance building, and from there they could reach the public square and the marshal unit office if it was still loyal. The old corridor tied into the building's basement service spine, and Mara felt the air change from rust and damp to cleaner recycled flow. A low hum filled the corridor, and the lights dimmed, and Mara stopped. The vibration was so faint she felt it more than heard it, a soft pressure rolling through the vents above like distant machinery breathing. Inez whispered, "What now?" Mara listened, and the hum was not storm power. It was a drone swarm moving through ductwork somewhere overhead. She guided them into a side alcove and opened an equipment cabinet with a strap cutter, then pulled out heat blankets used for hypothermia. She wrapped one around Ronan, not for warmth but to muddle his heat signature, and then wrapped one around herself and Inez. "Stay close," Mara said, and she counted her breaths by the uneven blink of failing lights until the hum drifted on, searching. Mara waited one more beat, listening for the sound to thin, and then moved again. They reached the utility junction room, pipes in every direction and an old scratch control panel on the wall. Mara recognized it as the emergency venting control for the corridor system, dangerous in the wrong hands but still a tool. She turned to Ronan and kept her questions tight. "You said you were the chain. How is that true?" "It is a split key," Ronan whispered. "Two pieces. Mine is one. The other is with a doctor." "Which doctor?" Mara asked. "Dr. Selwyn Rusk," Ronan said, and Inez's eyes widened. "Rusk? He runs logistics. He is a friend of the Chancellor." Mara felt the trap complete itself in her mind, and the name of the Chancellor settled like a weight. If Vera Lorne wanted the life store, she would not send official police first. She would send private hunters and hide behind public safety. "We're going back up," Mara said. Inez blinked. "Up? Into the city?" "Yes," Mara replied. "They want us to disappear. We will not." Ronan's breath hitched. "They will kill me." "They will not do it in public," Mara said. "Not yet." Mara led them up a narrow service stair into the back of the civic maintenance building, quiet and mostly empty in this cycle. She moved like she belonged there, because she had patched water lines in its basement before, and people like Mara were invisible until someone needed them. They reached a side exit into an alley behind the civic plaza, and the plaza lights were on with clusters of nervous people talking about the health alert. Mara kept them in shadow and watched private security in dark uniforms moving with purpose at the far end. Mara did not know the unit name, but she knew the posture, and her mouth went dry. Inez whispered, "We need help." "We get Dr. Rusk," Mara said. They slipped to the back service entrance of the logistics clinic, the annex where supplies were tracked and cleared, and the door was locked. Mara knocked in a specific rhythm she had used before when delivering urgent stock. A camera lens shifted, and a voice came through a speaker. "Who is it?" "Mara Quell." "I need to speak to Dr. Rusk now," she said. A pause stretched, then the voice returned. "Dr. Rusk is busy." Mara leaned closer, voice low but firm. "This is about the life store." Silence followed, then the lock clicked, and the door opened a crack to reveal a nervous young aide. Mara pushed in and guided Ronan and Inez inside fast. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and paper, and a man in a white coat stood near a desk with gray hair and tired eyes. Dr. Selwyn Rusk looked at Mara, then at Ronan, and his face went pale. You, he whispered to Ronan. You have my other half, Ronan said, jaw clenched. Dr. Rusk's gaze snapped back to Mara, hands trembling. I do not know why you brought him here. Do you want us all arrested? I want you to stop pretending, Mara said. Someone locked the pavilion. Someone sent hunters into a hospital. That is not public health. That is theft. Dr. Rusk flinched and tried to hold his ground, but the words came out thin. It is protection. Inez stepped forward, anger shaking her voice. Protection for who? For Harbor Kline, Dr. Rusk said, shoulders sagging. For stability, Mara watched him closely and saw a cornered man, not a villain enjoying power. She leaned in and kept her voice. Quiet. Tell me who cornered you. Dr. Rusk closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were wet. The Chancellor, Vera Lorne. Ronan let out a harsh breath. She promised the reserve to outsiders. She promised access in exchange for control. Dr. Rusk nodded, miserable. I try to stop it. I try to slow it down, but she has private security and leverage. She offered evac priority to families. She threatened to cut supplies. Mara's mind moved fast. Where is she now? In the administrative tower, Dr. Rusk said. I can hear them moving equipment for a public address. Good, Mara said. We will attend. Inez stared at her. Attends, we will be arrested. Not if she is forced to speak carefully, Mara said. She cannot admit she wants a life store. She can only hide behind health and order. Dr. Rusk looked at Mara like she was insane. They will kill you. They will try, Mara said. We are not letting them do it quietly. A sharp beep came from Dr. Rusk's desk console, and he went pale. The security line just flagged an unauthorized entry. They know you are here. Mara grabbed a small pouch from the supply shelf, emergency seal patches, and a compact inhaler unit, and she kept her hand steady. Give me the other half. Dr. Rusk hesitated, then pulled a small flat metal token from his coat with a simple groove pattern. His voice dropped into a whisper. It links to the vault lock. If you present both halves, it will open. Ronan reached for it, but Mara caught his hand. Not yet. We do this where it matters. Footsteps approached the clinic, multiple and fast, and Mara pushed Dr. Rusk toward the back corridor. Is there a back exit? Through records, he said, breath quick. They moved into a records room packed with paper files and old digital storage, and the back door was already being tested from outside. Someone was on the other side, and Mara felt the hunt tighten. She turned to Dr. Rusk. Do you have public broadcast access? No, he whispered. Only the tower. Then we go to the tower, Mara said. Inez stared like Mara had lost her mind, and Mara kept her voice low. If we do not, we die in a hallway. If we do, we might live, and she might fall. The records door shuddered. The lock groaned, and Mara scanned shelves and narrow aisles until she saw a small floor hatch used for tower lines. It was the kind of access meant for cable crews, not medics, and now it was the only clean route. Now, Mara said. They opened the hatch and dropped into the cable crawl, cramped but running toward the administrative tower through maintenance bones of the city. Mara had never used it, but she had heard rumors, and rumors often carry the leftover shape of truth. They crawled by touch, breathing hard, and behind them the records door broke open as voices shouted. Mara did not look back, and time passed strangely under the city as metal scraped knees and palms. Ronan's breathing rasped, but he kept moving, and Mara kept him moving. At last they reached a ladder shaft and climbed into the administrative tower basement, where the corridor smelled of polish and power. Above them, Mara could hear the building awake, doors cycling, shoes moving fast, and clipped voices rehearsing steady lines. She led them into a stairwell and climbed, keeping to the edges where fewer cameras watched. Halfway up, Ronan stumbled, and Mara caught him before he fell. Mara, I cannot keep going, Ronan whispered. You can, Mara said, because you're not doing this for yourself. Ronan swallowed. Who am I doing it for? For everyone who cannot bargain, Mara said, and they climbed. Near the top, voices in the hall carried talk of the health alert and stabilizing public confidence. Dr. Rusk shook. They will see us. Yes, Mara said. That is the point. She stepped into the hall, bright and clean, full of people in tidy clothing who froze at the sight of Mara dragging a battered patient and two shaken medical staff out of a stairwell. A security officer started forward. Mara raised a hand. I'm a medic from the Kline Emergency Pavilion. I have a patient who is being hunted in a hospital. I need the Chancellor now. This area is restricted, the officer said, eyes narrowing. I do not care, Mara replied, looking past him toward the broadcast room door. The door was already lit with active indicators, and Mara could hear a technician inside calling out test levels in a quick count. Before the officer could speak again, a voice called from the end of the hall. Let them through. Chancellor Vera Lorne stepped into view in a tailored coat untouched by dust, hair perfect, smile practiced, and her eyes landed on Ronan without flinching. She spoke as if she had been expecting Mara. Mara Quell, you have created unnecessary fear. You created the fear when you sent hunters into my ward, Mara said. I sent security to contain a breach. The Chancellor replied, smile tightening. We have a suspected contamination incident. Mara stepped closer and lowered her voice just enough to make it intimate for the people nearest. If he is contaminated, why do you need the life store key? The hallway went quiet, and Dr. Rusk flinched while Inez stared at the Chancellor. The Chancellor's eyes flickered for a tiny crack, then recovered. You are confused, she said. This patient is unstable. He is endangering public order. Public order, Mara repeated calm. That is a convenient phrase. It sounds like safety. It sounds like care. Mara, you are a medic, the Chancellor said. You do not understand governance. I understand leverage, Mara replied. And I understand that you cannot open the life store without him. A staffer near the broadcast door whispered, Life store, and murmurs began to spread. The Chancellor's eyes sharpened. You have no idea what you are saying, she snapped softly. I know you are about to speak to the city, Mara said. You're about to tell them to remain calm while you steal their survival. Security, the Chancellor said, and it was not a shout, it was a command. Two men in dark uniforms stepped out of side hall with smooth, predatory movement, and Mara felt her heartbeat go heavy. They did not wear rescue logos, and they did not pretend. The Red Moro leader spoke quietly. Hand over the patient. Who are you under? Mara asked. He did not answer, and the Chancellor answered for him with steel in her voice. They are under me, and I'm under the duty to keep Harbor Kline alive. Mara nodded as if accepting the statement, then forced the line into the open. If you are keeping Harbor Kline alive, why did you lock the hospital and send armed men through triage? Heads turned, and the security officer shifted uncertainly. The Chancellor's lips pressed together. It was necessary, she said. Necessary for what? Mara asked. Necessary to prevent collapse, the Chancellor said, voice rising a notch. We are on the edge of supply failure. We cannot afford disorder. Then you should not create disorder inside an emergency ward, Mara said, voice quiet. You will hand him over, the Chancellor said, or you will be removed. Mara needed witnesses beyond a hallway, and she looked at the broadcast door where a camera crew waited and a technician stood by the audio console. Mara took a step toward the door, and the Red Moro men moved to block. Mara stopped and lifted her wrist unit. I can speak. Right now. Into your broadcast. You will not, the Chancellor said, eyes narrowing. Then arrest me on camera, Mara replied, and explain why a medic is being dragged away for asking about the life store. The hallway went still, and the Chancellor's jaw tightened. Mara could see the choice, force and reveal the truth, or back down and lose control, and the Chancellor chose a third path. She smiled again, practiced and gracious. Bring them in. We will resolve this calmly. Mara knew calm was a cage, but it was also the only door she would get, so she guided Ronan into the broadcast room with Inez and Dr. Russ close. Red Moro followed 2 steps behind like shadows. Studio lights burned bright over a clean backdrop with the Harbor Kline seal, and the camera aimed at a polished frame. The technician's eyes flicked between the Chancellor and Mara, hands uncertain over the controls. Begin, the Chancellor said. The red recording light came on, and the Chancellor looked into the lens with a smooth voice. Citizens of Harbor Kline, we are experiencing a public health irregularity. Please remain calm and stay in your zones while we ensure safety. Mara listened, waited, and watched the lie build itself with careful words. The Chancellor continued, voice steady. Our emergency services are fully operational. The Kline Emergency Pavilion is secure. Mara stepped forward just enough to be seen at the edge of frame. It is not secure. The Chancellor's smile froze for a fraction, then resumed as if nothing had happened. Mara Quell is a medic who is under stress. We appreciate her service. We will support her. Mara kept her tone calm, but her words landed like a hammer. You locked the pavilion. You sent Grey Vow and a triage to hunt a patient. You sent Red Morrow into the city to finish it. That is not health. That is theft. Stop, the Chancellor whispered with her smile still on, but the camera was recording. This patient, Ronan Hale, carries half of the authorization chain for the Life Store Reserve, Mara said. Dr. Selwyn Rusk carries the other half. Dr. Rusk flinched, then stepped into view, face pale, and the Chancellor's smile tightened. Mara, you are spreading dangerous misinformation. Mara turned to the camera. If I am wrong, say it clearly. Say the Life Store has nothing to do with this. Say you did not order the hospital lockdown. Say you did not hire Grey Vow. The Chancellor did not answer the exact question, and Mara saw why, because she could not. The Chancellor turned slightly and spoke out of the corner of her mouth. Take them. Red Morrow shifted, and Mara stepped closer to the camera. If you arrest me on live broadcast, you confirm the Life Store is the prize. If you let me walk, you lose the prize. The Chancellor froze, and the camera kept rolling, and Mara did not beg. She offered a trap that looked like a way out. Call the Civic Marshal Unit, Mara said. Put them in this room. Put your claim on record. If this is public health, you will welcome oversight. I am the oversight, the Chancellor snapped, and the broadcast caught it. Then you just admitted this is not health, Mara said. You just admitted it is power. A voice crackled from a wall speaker, the tower internal line. Chancellor, we have a situation. Civic marshals are on their way. They saw the broadcast. The Chancellor's mouth tightened, and she turned back to the camera to recover. Citizens, please disregard the disruption. You can stop this, Mara said. Stand down your private units. Let Ronan transfer the authorization chain to the Lawful Reserve Board under martial oversight. If you do not, the city will know you tried to steal their survival. The Chancellor looked at Ronan with something like hate, and Ronan's voice came out weak, but present. You promised him access. You promised the reserve in exchange for control. You were supposed to be quiet, the Chancellor whispered, forgetting the camera, and the camera caught it. The technician flinched, and Mara felt the line break in the room. The broadcast room door opened, and a group in gray. Uniforms entered with badges actually engraved. The Civic Marshal Unit. Their lead officer, Marshal Captain Tarek Vale, stepped forward, eyes calm. Chancellor Vera Lorne. By public authority, this broadcast is now evidence. You will stand down. You cannot do this, the Chancellor hissed. We can, Tarek Vale said. We just did. Red Morrow shifted, hands moving toward concealed tools, and Mara stepped subtly to put herself between Ronan and the nearest man. Tarek Vale lifted a hand, and his marshal spread in practiced angles. Stand down, he repeated. The Red Morrow leader glanced at the Chancellor, and she gave a tiny nod. Red Morrow moved, and the clash was tight and controlled in a small room full of witnesses. They tried to grab Ronan, to take the prize before the law could close in, and marshals blocked with train holds. Mara shoved Ronan behind the camera rig and pushed Inez and Dr. Rusk toward the back wall, without letting panic take her hands. Mara grabbed a rolling light stand and shoved it into the Red Morrow man's path, then kicked the wheel lock so it jammed. He stumbled, cursed, tried to go around, and Mara stepped into his space and slammed her shoulder into his chest to disrupt his balance. Tarek Vale's people moved fast, pinned arms, and forced Red Morrow down with blunt control, no blood and no spectacle. The Chancellor tried to slip out the side door, and Mara saw it. She stepped into the doorway and blocked it with her body, and Vera Lorne stopped with fury in her eyes. You think you saved them? She hissed. I think you tried to sell them, Mara said. You do not understand what is coming, the Chancellor snapped. Without deals, this town dies. Then we die honest, Mara said. Not owned. For a heartbeat, Mara saw fear under the anger, and then Marshal Captain Vale stepped in beside her. Chancellor, you are relieved of duty pending investigation. The Chancellor's words failed, and the camera caught her perfect mask turning brittle. The room settled into tense quiet, and Ronan sagged against the camera rig, breathing hard. Mara checked his pulse with practiced fingers, and Inez crouched close, hands shaking but determined. Is he going to make it? Inez asked. He will if we stop treating him like a prize, Mara said. Dr. Rusk stood nearby, eyes hollow. I did not want this. Then help fix it, Mara replied. Tarek Vale turned to Ronan and Dr. Rusk, voice steady. You said there's an authorization chain. Can you transfer it to the Lawful Reserve Board now? Yes, Dr. Rusk said, swallowing. If we go to the reserve vault. Not alone, Ronan rasped. Agreed, Tarek Vale said. They moved quickly under martial escort down from the tower and across the plaza to the reserve vault building, a low reinforced structure built to withstand storms and sabotage. People gathered along the route, drawn by the broadcast and the sight of marshals escorting the Chancellor in custody. Mara kept her head down and pushed Ronan's support chair while Inez walked close. Whispers followed them, life store, lockdown, private security, and the town was waking up to what had almost happened. At the vault, a heavy door waited with a simple lock interface designed to accept two halves of a physical token pattern and a living confirmation phrase. Dr. Rusk held his half, and Ronan held his, and Mara watched their hands shake. If I open this, they will know, Ronan whispered. They already know, Mara said. Now everyone knows. Ronan nodded once and pressed his half into the interface groove, and Dr. Rusk pressed his half beside it. The interface lights pulsed, and a calm old voice spoke from the vault. Authorization chain detected. Confirm transfer request. Ronan swallowed and spoke hoarse but clear. I request transfer of reserve authority to the Harbor Kline Reserve Board under martial oversight. The lock paused as if thinking, and then the seal released with a deep mechanical sigh. The door opened onto shelves stacked with sealed packs, filtration units, and medical crates, the quiet heart of the city. Mara felt tension release in her chest. Not only relief, but grief for how close they had come to losing it. Tarek Vale spoke to his team. Secure the vault. Set lawful control. No private hands. His people moved, and Dr. Rusk sank against the wall with eyes closed. Inez touched Mara's arm. We did it, Inez whispered. We're not done, Mara said. What else? Inez asked. We have to clean up the lie, Mara replied, or it grows back. Marshal Captain Vale escorted them back to the plaza, where a public announcement station had been set up, simple and unpolished. Vera Lorne stood under guard, face rigid, trying to keep dignity. Citizens of Harbor Kline, the Life Store Reserve has been secured under lawful authority, Tarek Vale announced. The emergency pavilion lockdown was unauthorized and is under investigation. Private units known as Grave Vow and Red Morrow have been detained for illegal actions within medical and civic spaces. Murmurs rose, angry and afraid, and Mara stayed at the edge and let the law speak. Vale gestured toward her. Medic Mara Quell intervened to protect a patient and prevent unlawful seizure of the reserve chain. She will not be punished for doing her duty. Mara fell eyes on her and kept her gaze low, and Ronan stepped forward with Inez supporting him. His voice was weak but steady. I was part of the chain. I kept quiet too long. I thought silence would protect the town. It did not. It only protected the Chancellor. You are a traitor, Vera Lorne spat. I am a witness, Ronan said. Dr. Rusk stepped forward too, trembling. I confirm the Chancellor pressured reserve access negotiations without public consent. She used private security to seize the chain. The crowd's anger rose like wind, and Vera Lorne tried to speak, but her words fell into noise. Tarek Vale raised his hand for quiet. An interim council will be formed by the end of the day cycle. Supply negotiations will be reviewed in public. The Reserve Board will report weekly status. No private unit will operate under civic authority. People began to breathe again the way a town breathes after a storm passes without tearing roofs off. Mara watched and felt no triumph, only the dull exhaustion of someone who had sprinted for hours without sleep. Inez leaned close. "Are you okay?" "No," Mara said, "but we are alive." Inez let out a shaky laugh that turned half into a sob, and Ronan sagged as marshals guided him toward a crude medical transport under escort. Mara watched it go, and Dr. Rusk approached her with regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "Be useful," Mara replied. "That is how you apologize." Dr. Rusk nodded and moved to speak with Vale about records and evidence. Inez touched Mara's sleeve. "They will talk about you," Inez said. "They will call you brave." Mara's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Tell them I was late on paperwork." Inez laughed, then sobered. "What happens to Pavilion 1? It gets cleaned," Mara said, "and then it goes back to doing what it was built for." Captain Vale returned, posture firm. "Mara Quell, we will need your statement. There will be an inquiry." "I will give it," Mara said. "You understand you will be under scrutiny," he warned. "I've been under scrutiny my whole life," Mara replied. "This is just louder." Vale gave a small nod, something like respect, and the plaza began to disperse. Mara walked back toward the Kline Emergency Pavilion with Inez at her side, and the air felt less like a net. A little later, when the noise thinned and the marshals had taken their positions, Mara stepped back through the pavilion doors. The lockdown lights were off, and doors opened normally, but she could still feel the memory of sealed corridors in her ribs. At the pavilion entrance, staff were regrouping, and people looked at Mara with a mix of gratitude and fear. She wanted none of it, only water and silence. She walked into triage and smelled disinfectant and old floor polish, and ordinary felt precious. A nurse approached, uncertain. "Mara, Director Sorn. Is he arrested too?" "Not yet," Mara said. "Then where is he?" the nurse asked. Mara felt the name scrape at her thoughts, because Director Sorn had been a voice and a shadow behind Grey Vow. She knew the intake console kept the cleanest trail, every lock change and route push stamped into the event log, so she went straight to it and opened the record feed. She only needed one thing, a routing code. She found a single origin node that did not match any pavilion control station, and it matched a relay outside the city grid. A cold thread of realization tightened her chest. Inez watched her face. "What?" Inez asked. "Director Sorn was not in this building," Mara said. "He was using a relay out there." "Out where?" Inez asked. Mara looked toward the industrial edge of Harbor Kline where old storm towers and abandoned service modules stood like skeletons. "Outside the town line. Close enough to pull strings." Inez swallowed. "So he is still out there?" "Yes," Mara said. "And he will not like losing." "Do we chase him?" Inez asked. "Not now," Mara replied. "We finished this job. We do not start another one bleeding." Inez nodded, relieved, then looked embarrassed by that relief. Mara reached in her pocket and pulled out a small strip of paper she had grabbed from the ambulance bay earlier. It was a torn maintenance tag with a handwritten code that did not match hospital format. Mara stared at it, and the code matched a route used by off-grid haulers, the kind who delivered unregistered cargo to forgotten docks. Inez leaned closer. "What is that?" Mara folded the paper and slid it back into her pocket. "A new problem." "Is it connected?" Inez asked. Mara shook her head, and she meant it. "No, this one is done." She took a slow breath and looked around the triage hall, where people worked again. The pavilion was alive again, and Mara wanted it to stay that way. "If anyone asks, tell them I only did my job as a medic," Mara said. Inez managed a tired smile. "And if they ask about the code in your pocket, tell them I'm going to fix a leak," Mara said dry. "That is what I always do." Then she walked toward the exit with the tag warm in her pocket, and the wind outside carried the faint smell of distant storm towers waiting for someone to notice they were no longer empty. Mara Quell did not ask to be remembered, and she only chose the kind of world Harbor Kline would live in. A world where a hospital stays a hospital, where survival is not sold to the highest bidder, and where one medic can still draw a hard line and hold it. But in places built on the edge of scarcity, the fight never truly ends, and power learns and adapts and find a new door. So if you're still listening, remember this. Sometimes the bravest thing is not charging forward. Sometimes it is simply refusing to step aside. If this story held you to the end, please hit like, share it with someone who loves science fiction, and subscribe for the next episode. Your support tells the algorithm to keep stories like this alive, and it tells me to keep writing them. Until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and keep your line.